Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to today's edition of RE353, where I take old stories I've narrated and update them to modern audio standards. This particular story is called Püpers and Rainbows, written by AltCipher. Day 57. The small creatures native to this planet have finally taken an interest in me. I've watched them come a bit closer every morning when I'm first waking up. This morning, one of them was actually on the windowsill. I could have reached out and touched him. I say him, but I don't really know the concept of their genders, but did not for fear of scaring off the entire tribe. They typically run around 1.5 to 3/4 of a meter tall, completely covered in fur with large black eyes. They seem as comfortable on 4 legs as on 2. They are quite as skittish as most small animals on Earth, but they still show a great deal of prudence and caution when investigating an unknown creature such as myself. This morning, they arrived at my shelter in a group of 7 or so. It's dreadfully difficult to properly count them, as they scamper and hide as soon as I gaze at them too long. I've never seen a group larger than 9, that I could tell, nor a group smaller than 3. They seem to have a manner of language, but I cannot divine the meaning. The translators I've brought along still reports insufficient corpus. Their high-pitched chitterings must be intelligent communication, though. I can feel it in my bones. Day 96. I've been here on this unexplored world for what I think of as 3 months, but I must break myself of Earth-based timekeeping. The days here run nearly 20% longer than on Earth, and there are 3 major satellites visible to the naked eye. Seems foolish to still use the terms like month in such circumstances, but we are creatures of habit. I've decided to name the small mammals here Püpers. I realize it sounds childish and not very Latin-like, as the other species we encountered are named. However, as I am the discoverer, I believe I've earned the right to a bit of childishness. I recalled the name from my own childhood. My sister and I would play in the woods behind the house. We invented a race of fairies who lived near us, and that was what we called them. As these small creatures remind me of those better days, I have chosen to reuse the name. There is one Püper in particular who I've come to recognize as the most curious, or perhaps the most foolhardy. I've called him Brownie. His fur is a deep walnut hue with caramel highlights. He comes the closest when they come to visit. I've taken to feeding them various nuts and berries I find on my exploratory walks. I dare not try any earth food on them for fear of a terrible reaction. Much as chocolate is fatal to dogs, I am wary that even the most benign treat may prove troublesome. Brownie has taken to coming within arm's reach of me while I'm working outside. I've offered to pick him up, but it seems his curiosity has its limits. Speaking of my work outside, I've decided to build a cabin near a waterfall further inland. I plan to sink a paddle water generator in it so that I may disconnect the fusion reactor I brought with me. This experiment was intended to show off self-sufficiency, not the ability to use our same technology on other worlds, though I do admit the quantum printer is far too useful to abandon outright. The work is hard but enjoyable. I've selected the most likely looking local lumber for the construction along with a solid stone foundation. I admit that I've cheated on certain parts of the experiment and used lifter technology to aid in placing the stones. This should invalidate the results, but it will save my spine. Day 151. I've made my first breakthrough with Brownie today. As it turns out, he has a remarkable facility with languages. My translator still struggles with the Püpers vernacular, but Brownie understands me well enough. He's been watching me build the cabin above the waterfall. As I work, I've taken to talking to him as I would an old friend. One afternoon, as I was planning a tree for eventual use in the dining room, I mentioned that I could use a drink. I had no more said the words than Brownie scampered off with my canteen and filled it from the river. The water was cool, and I was quite shocked, to say the least. I began more deliberately teaching him vocabulary, names of things I had to hand, and a few simple verbs. Brownie's quick mind snapped up the lessons nearly as quickly as I could instruct him. By that evening, my cabin had made no further progress, but Brownie could correctly identify all the items I had taught him: stones, trees, rivers, hammer, and so forth. I went to bed that evening with a mind buzzing with possibilities. Day 172. Brownie shocked me once again today. We've continued his lessons of English, and he has been an excellent pupil. Today, though, I had to move on from vocabulary to diction. Brownie had begun imitating the words that I'd been teaching him yesterday. His voice is much higher than my own, but it is intelligible. There were a few other puppers standing to the side watching us as he initiated his first conversation. I was, needless to say, overjoyed at hearing Brownie squeak out his first sentence. He said, "Blueberries, please." I've been using the native plants as inducements to keep their attention, and discovered that Brownie has a decided preference for the blueberries. I shall attempt to garden when the growing season arrives. I tried to elicit further conversation with Brownie with only marginal successes. He seems to not yet comprehend complex sentence structure, but can easily grasp the meaning of more primitive constructions, don't run or need water, and the like. Day 201. Brownie's grammar is improving by leaps and bounds. It seems a lifetime ago that he began speaking. Since then, he's become much more fluent and erudite. Just this morning he told me, "We are friends, we like you." I was nearly moved to tears. I have also been made aware he is teaching a few of his compatriots English. A second pupper came close to me today and asked for grey nuts. There is a species of that I can only assume are nuts that grow wild throughout the region. This new fellow, whom I've taken to calling Winston, isn't quite as studious as Brownie, but, nonetheless, has become conversant. The remainder of the Brownie's people seem to at least understand English, but still require translation to their native tongue. I cannot fathom why my translator has all but given up on the pupper language. Perhaps I shall retire that device and rely on the pupper's facility with language instead. Day 233. Something terrible has happened. It seems that the puppers have some sort of natural predator near the water's edge. I had not known of this beast until yesterday. It seems these creatures are migratory and only pass through this region once per year. The start of the caravan came just after luncheon yesterday. Before I go into detail on the incident, I feel I should describe these predators. They are some 3 to 4 meters long, with fully a third of their body length taken up by a massive tail, which can expand vertically to form some sort of rudder while they are in the water. They have long, vicious snouts that carry dozens of small, sharp teeth. Their eyes are recessed under a heavy brow, giving them a most intimidating air. They are colored to match the greens and browns of the water and the forest's edge. They have broad, flat feet that appear webbed. I say appeared webbed, for I have not yet captured one, dead or alive, for detailed examination. Their bodies, however, are streamlined for ease of swimming, and their amphibious nature makes them all the more deadly. I cannot help but think of them as some strange crossbreed between an alligator, a shark, and an anteater, even though I know those animals have never been within 1 trillion miles of this world. These predators feast upon the puppers and become fat on them. I find myself at a crossroads. This is the natural order of things in this world, but I do not wish my friends to suffer. I could most likely devise some way to keep the puppers safe, but that may cause the predators to starve or the puppers to become overpopulated. Man has been a cause for enough environmental damage on Earth, and I would hate to bring such a lineage to this world. The incident was an unexpected attack by these predators upon the puppers that were visiting the future site of my cabin. The beast took half a dozen of the small mammals before I could intervene. For all their size, they are frightfully fast. Brownie and Winston both survived, but I feel that there was more luck than anything. The puppers ran off, and I have not seen them since. Day 247. It has been 2 weeks since I last saw any puppers, though the predators seem to be lurking about every time I look out the window. 1 or 2 will crawl from the riverbanks, search for a bite to eat, and eventually return to the water from whence they came. The whole process repeats itself half an hour later with a new brace of monsters. I'm still deciding on a name for these creatures, as I feel I cannot simply continue to call them beasts or predators. I miss my little friends. Day 255. I've decided to call the river predators Boans, after the Celtic river gods. Day 268. The light has come back into my world. The Boans seem to be appearing less frequently now. It is rare that I see more than one a day. I believe I saw one of the puppers standing just at the edge of the woods yesterday evening at dusk. It was difficult to see in the waning light, but the large dark eyes felt unmistakable to me. I've been working on a diversion for the Bowens. I believe that they are merely passing through this region and would not suffer too greatly should I deny them a repast on my shores. I do not know their full migratory patterns, but I firmly believe that I shall see them return this way at some point, just as geese and salmon do on Earth. Though whether these creatures make seasonal, annual, decennial, or some other singular period migrations, I cannot say. However, I intend to be ready for them when they return. Day 274. The Puppers have returned, and the Bowens are no more. Brownies tell me they come down from the headwaters once a year and gorge themselves on puppers. They never see the Bowens return back upstream, so it appears that I have sufficient time to enact my plan. I asked the Brownies how the Bowens survived the waterfall. He told me that they do not know, and they see many Bowen bodies washed up on the shores downstream. I shall investigate this further when next the Bowens migrate past my cabin. For now, I'm quite happy to have my friends back. The cabin is coming along nicely. I've erected the structure and am now working to move the last of the furniture in. The temporary shelter I brought along served its purpose, but I'm glad for the extra room. Brownie and Winston seem to approve of the new place and have been coming around more as of late. Day 362. I've been remiss in my journaling as I approach the first Earth year, though not the first local year. I find myself reminiscing. The first major news of import is that I had incorrectly gendered Brownie as male. I found my mistake when she had given birth to a litter of pups in my pantry. It is dark, cool, and safe. I can see why she chose that spot. Winston is the proud father of a set of beautiful children. Brownie was hesitant to let me in for the first few days after the birth, but finally relented as the children's eyes opened. The second news item follows from the first. Brownie and Winston and their children have moved in with me, permanently it seems. I'm glad for the company, but I find myself terrified of setting foot down lest I injure one of the children. They are quite small and quicker than one would imagine. I considered banning them for a time, but could not convince Brownie. I have instead erected a small barrier to my room, which should prove sufficient to keep the children out. The final bit of news is that I believe the puppers could be brought up to our level of intelligence and civilization within a generation or two. This is an astounding claim, I know, but I believe the opportunity is solid. The children are wonderfully quick of mind. They picked up the native pupper language within a month or two and were conversant in English by 6 months, as reckoned by Earth calendar anyhow. I have since then been teaching them physics, chemistry, biology, mathematics, art, literature, astronomy, economics, philosophy, and other topics that I could fit into their furry heads. They seem to have an intuitive grasp of languages, but require more diligent study of hard sciences. If they could be civilized, they would find vocations through known space as diplomats and translators, I'm sure. Day 391. We've completed a Bowen defense system. Charlie, one of Brownie's offspring, offered several magnificent improvements over my design. Of all the children, he seems to most easily take to engineering disciplines. Day 627. The Bowens returned last night. All the puppers were either safely ensconced in my cabin or had hidden deep within the woods. Late at night, or perhaps early in the morning, depending on how you look at it, the alarm I had set for the Bowen activity woke me from a deep slumber. I threw the master switch to light up the riverbank with the floodlights and saw the Bowen writhing on the muddy shore. We had installed a number of pylons out in the middle of the river. The installation had begun far upstream of us and gradually angled out to deeper water. This would still allow the Bowens to pass, but would keep them safely away from my side of the river. The pylons were little more than shaved and sharpened tree trunks, but it served well enough to force the large debris and animals away from my cabin. We also entrenched a palisade upstream of us where the pylon line at the river started. The Bowens would then be forced to either venture far deeper into the woods than we'd ever seen, or they would be forced back into the water. It was quite the undertaking, and it took most of the year, but we were glad for it. Finally, the last line of defense was a wire mesh in the ground between my cabin and the river, extending many meters both upstream and down. We passed the word that the puppers were to stay away from my cabin and the river until the Bowen season had passed. We received little argument on that point. This knight, however, found a single bone either too clever or too foolish for our simple guideline of trees. He discovered the folly of his ways when his massive weight completed the circuit and electrocuted him on the riverbank. I watched through his final death throes under the brilliant lights I had installed. I left the corpse of the bone where I fell for several days until I could no longer stand the stench. His body served notice to all other bones who would think to intrude on my fiefdom. Beware this side of the river, for it brings naught but death. Brownie and Winston were overjoyed at our success. They told me theirs may be the first litter of puppers to all live to maturity. We had a feast that night to celebrate, and Brownie told me that the children would like to call me uncle. I then had to explain to all of them that tears come from happiness as well as sadness for humans. End of story. I'd quickly like to thank our Tier 5 channel members, Casper Arnholt, John Creighton, Manatharia, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.